Hello listeners, and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. My name is Richard Sverrisson, and I'm joined today by my colleague Nora Kamprath, editor Germany, and Thina Saltvedt, who's a chief analyst at Nordea Bank. So a warm welcome to you both.
Hello.
Today we'll talk about the challenges in transforming the way we produce and consume energy. Thina, you were a former oil and gas analyst, and now you're looking at the renewable sector. That's quite an interesting change. Can you explain the reasons for your direction or your move into the green side of things, the renewable sector?
Well, first of all, it's a personal matter because I wanted to work with something I thought is the future. I'm starting to get a bit afraid of what we're seeing, like how the effect of the CO2 emissions on basically on the earth, the climate changes, and also because it's very interesting to follow up on the new energies or the new energy sectors, how they did develop, new companies coming in. So I think it's both like a personal worry about the changes in the climate, but also because it's very interesting to see the new energy sources and not at all the new sectors building up.
For sure. I mean, how do the sectors compare?
Oh, they're very different from oil and gas. I mean, that's mature sectors, especially, the oil market is a global market. Wind, solar power, they're still, local markets. They're not that interconnected. And also the companies could be small. So I would say they're more fragmented as well. So, but of course it's new.
Yeah.
So it will develop. If you compare it to the gas market, that is still, it's becoming more international with the LNG. But of course, it's more regional, I would say. It's not totally global yet.
Not yet, anyway, no. From a personal perspective, I always sense quite a big difference between the gas and the renewable sectors in some of the ways that you've described. I've, in terms of age and gender, in dynamism of the people, of the markets. Would it be fair to characterize the old sort of gas and the oil majors as dinosaurs, and some of the younger, or some of the renewables companies as more sort of dynamic and fast moving, reacting to change?
I think some of the oil companies they basically see the future also within the green sectors. They might be because they feel threatened about the development. They don't want to end up as a dinosaur. But some of the old fossil fuel producers, the oil companies, say that, okay, this is not my niche, I want to stay in the sector I know I can do. And then, we have to compete for the last barrels we are going to produce. Some say that, okay, this gives us a new opportunity. We want to grow into the new green sector. We want to use the experience, the technology we have, and try to transfer that into the new areas, so the new green areas, for example, offshore wind. So I think it varies a bit, and it varies also what the big the oil companies want to do. Some of them are going into battery production. Some of them are going into electricity. Some of them are going into solar, wind power. So it varies a lot, I would say.
I think we'd want to come back to that in terms of the different strategies, adopted by the oil and gas majors into their move into renewables. But I remember a colleague of mine at a rival newswire. He was booed off stage at a gas conference in Singapore. I think it was an oil and gas conference, because he suggested that the gas companies should look to German utilities for an example of what happens if you don't adapt to disruptive change. And they weren't very happy. The audience wasn't very happy with that. Have you ever witnessed anything like that?
Well, I think what we're seeing now, I think some of the oil and gas companies maybe they got the shock from what we've seen in the coal market, because there's no doubt that both that the demand for coal seemed to face an end soon. But the other part, I think, is also the consumer, how the consumers look at the industry as such. And I think they're starting to feel the pressure that, people are starting to blame them for the climate changes we're seeing around. So it's negativity is increasing against the fossil fuel producers, and I think they can feel it as well. You can see that on the marketing campaigns, for example, how they want to brand themselves. Often you've seen that they brand an oil company next to a windmill. Why did you do that? Because they want to be accepted in the audience as well and the public. So I think they feel the pressure.
So I think we're talking here about how they reacting to change, these oil and gas majors. But do you think all of them see the need to transform, or is there certain companies in certain parts of the world that are more reacting more quickly?
We've seen that European companies, oil and gas companies, are more into changing than the American ones. Some of the Americans don't seem to feel that much pressure actually about the climate changes at all. But we can see that European ones are testing out new markets to a larger extent. The rest, I wouldn't say they're changing very much. Middle East, Asia, we haven't seen big changes there. But also, in Europe, I think it depends a bit on the size of the company as well, because if you don't have that big amount of money you can lean on, you're probably more careful about testing out new markets. So I've talked to oil companies saying that, the new green energy sector is not something for us because we don't think that we have our experience and technology is not within that area. We want to stay where we are and rather compete with the other oil companies about the last barrel than, moving into something we don't know anything about. Yeah. And we have seen also that some of the oil companies that want to test out the new green markets, they're moving slowly because it's not... one thing is the technology and experience you have from producing oil and gas, but the other thing is that how do actually the wind and solar market work? Who are your competitors? Who are your clients? What kind of contracts do you have? So this is new. You have to learn that as well, and I think that is where most of the challenges lies. Not necessarily the technology, but how the market works.
But do you think some of the pressure to change is coming from outside, is in terms of, pension funds looking at who they're investing in? I mean, this is part of the pressure on the companies, that they're facing pressure from shareholders or from pension funds or, to change.
Insurance companies, especially, that's the coal sector, I guess we're seeing more. But is there a worry that this could apply to oil and gas down the road?
I think we have already seen that the financial sector is starting to change here, because we in the financial sector, since I work here, we have started to actually require we actually measure companies we are lending money to or financing. We're also investing in because we want to know the climate footprint, also the sustainability footprint of the company. So every company, we lend money to or are financing or investing in, we make a sustainability ranking of the company. They get a score, and that score is part of also the credit process. So of course they feel the pressure, but we also see that many of the big investors, for example, the Norwegian Oil Fund, have said that, or it was actually the Ministry of Finance who came out last year and said, okay, the Norwegian Oil Fund should sell out of E&P, exploration and production companies, not the companies that have downstream production or also are moving into the green sectors, but the pure, E&P companies. And of course that created a reaction in the markets, because the Norwegian Oil Fund is the largest sovereign wealth fund in the world. It owns 1.4% of the listed stocks in the world. So of course, when they're moving, that makes a note to the rest of the world. And what we saw was that the energy index in Europe fell by 1.7% when this message came out. So of course, what the big either pension funds or the big funds are doing, the big large investors, when they starting to move and set a new direction, of course the smaller ones will follow, but in different timing here, of course. But
when you say energy index, what do you mean, Thina? The energy index fell by 1.7%. Yeah. So what's that? Is that an index of all the energy companies, or?
I haven't got into the details.
Okay. But it certainly created lots of ripples then, didn't it? That
I think it was probably some MSCI. I'm not sure. I haven't got into.
Okay, no worries. Yeah.
But you mentioned that we can see a divide between European and maybe American, Asian, Middle Eastern companies. And what I've noticed here, some companies, they started or they already implemented a name change to sort of change their image away. Especially here in Norway, we've seen Statoil, who has changed their name to Equinor. A bit less clear was in Denmark, we've seen Dong, that used to stand for Danish Oil and Gas Company, I believe, into Ørsted. Do you think that's just PR, or is it really sort of trying to showcase that the thinking within those companies is changing.
Well, Dong is actually selling out of oil and gas, so of course that's not a show-off. So they're moving into the green sector. Statoil, now Equinor, I don't think that is greenwashing either, but I think they're moving slowly because they want to gain experience before they really start to heavily invest in sector. These are sectors that I know very much about, for example, wind production. They want to use the experience and also some of the technology they have, especially for offshore wind, because they know the offshore sector very well. But of course, you need to test. You need to see how is the market working. They don't have that experience, of course, when going into a new market. And test also, you need to deliver. I mean, you need to deliver return on your investments at the end. So, of course, they want to test out and see how that works. So and now it looks much more promising, I would say. So of course, I guess they will, increase those investments going forward as well. So I think, from the start, moving a bit slowly to learn, gain experience. And I think that is why they also partnered up with a solar company in South America also, because there was a new market and wanted to have a partner. So different ways of doing it. But I don't think as we have seen for other European oil and gas companies as well, I don't think this is greenwashing. You can rather ask about the marketing of all of this sometimes, but not the actual strategy of doing it. I think that is, that they want to gain... They actually see profit coming into these markets in the future. And it's not that long until they expect that both solar and wind power have fallen so much in cost that you don't need subsidies. And of course, that will also remove the political risk which is connected to it. And when you reach that point, I think you reach the tipping point where you will see much more capital coming into the market because capital owners are often don't like too much of political risk. So I think we will see more changes in this and more investment coming in the future.
And what we've also seen, where maybe these companies don't have the technology or the know-how themselves, they go the route of acquisitions. We've seen with some of the more continental European players like BP or Total, they have bought, I think Shell as well, they have bought Sonnen, which is a German solar battery producer, but they also produce very large batteries that balance grid. So they have used this, and they also bought Lime Jump, which kind of aggregates and provides PPAs for sort of flexible generation. Do you think those are different strategies where you don't have the knowledge yourself, you acquire companies and that will help them grow? And how much investment of the overall pot, I mean, there are huge companies with a big balance sheet, is actually going into the green sector?
Well, I think it's, as you say, different strategy here. Some of the companies want to use the experience and move that into new areas. But other companies want to, need to buy the experience and the technology because they don't have it at the moment. So it's different ways of doing it. As we're seeing at the moment, the investments in the new energy sources are not that big compared to the rest. So still, the oil and gas companies in Europe, if you look at the portfolio, it's not really reflecting, the Paris goals. So they still invest more in fossil fuels than they do in the green sectors or battery technology. So
do you have any idea of the ratio there?
I don't, but it's small.
Okay, it's
because
small.
It's so small that they hardly report it in the quarterly report. So.
Okay, so that's quite minimal.
You say something.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, as you say, falling far short of the Paris goals. Yeah. Do you think? Is your impression that they have a clear strategy, or is there kind of buying solar, buying batteries, buying retail, just sort of trying a bit of everything and see what works?
I'm not really sure about, but of course they have a strategy of they want to go in there, otherwise they wouldn't be there at all. And I guess because they also see that, the shift can come quite fast, and also, costs have come down so fast as well. Solar power, 80% within the last 10 years. Wind power, 50%. So, it shouldn't take that long before you start earning money in these markets as well. And of course, battery technology, if you can break, that, you will be the first one to actually make batteries so well functioning that you can actually store electricity for a bit longer period, then of course you will reduce the argument that you need, for example, natural gas as a bridge or as a backup as well for solar and wind power, because and I think Tesla is starting to get there. Launching this new battery, and I guess now energy companies, before oil and gas companies, seeing this as well. So they want to be part of this development, but moving slowly because they don't have the experience yet.
No,
but do you think the oil and gas majors are becoming a threat to traditional utilities? We also see that they buy retail companies that sell power. And if we are now looking at the emergence of electric vehicles, you could argue that in the future, you don't pump petrol at a petrol station, is going to be power. Is that a future move, and will it push out traditional sellers of electricity?
They might. I mean, they're coming in as competitors that could change the market. We've seen that in the car market. Completely new players totally changed that market. Tesla was one, Google and Apple is another. So introducing new strategies, the new way of thinking, new technology, of course, will change the market as well. And that could be good, For the car market, it's been very good because the traditional car makers, they didn't want the electric cars to come into the market. It was very difficult, and several had tried before. But when Tesla came and opened up for others, and the new technology was introduced, and customers started to like this. That totally has changed the market, and you now see almost all the car producers are introducing electric cars. So I don't think that new dynamics in the market are bad. I think it might threaten some of the existing companies, but is that bad, or is it good to get new competition and more efficiency? Maybe that is what we need to adapt.
And it forces them, the established players, to change as well, as it happened in the EV markets.
Absolutely. So I'm not necessarily negative to that. It might actually speed up the process. So,
how do you see the demand for oil and gas developing in Europe? Generally, I mean, you mentioned now that there's a favorite phrase from the gas company. They like to say it's a bridging fuel between what we have now and the future. I mean, would you agree with that, or do you think that certain technological transformations could render that not exactly applicable?
Yeah, because the oil demand has decreased. I mean, especially you see on the fuel side. Traditionally, it's more on the fuel side we use oil in Europe. You don't use it that much for heating, or of course you do have something in other areas as well, but more than 60% goes to transportation. So when you will have, the cars have become much more efficient, and that is a way that you can blame the oil companies themselves. When letting oil prices go up to almost $150 per barrel, of course, we as consumers find more efficient solutions. And of course, that triggered the investment in green energy as well. And also, the European policies by being more, they want to be more independent of any supplies. They want to cut CO2 emissions, and, also want to introduce more green energy. That has a big impact on the total fossil fuel production and consumption in Europe. So, with the last European elections we have seen, or the EU election as well, you saw that the Green parties are moving up sharply. So I think, they want to speed up even more. And that is, of course, a threat to the gas companies, because they wanted to be that bridge builder. Of course, we can see that the EU, at least, production of natural gas is going down, and will be interesting to see with the UK as well. They started with some shale gas production, and now we saw these earthquakes coming. Scary, I find it at least. So I guess that will increase the opposition against this kind of production as well. So I think it looks like the EU want to speed up the move to go more straight into the green areas. And if you could, of course, make the networks more flexible, more connected as well, so you get more connection between the European electricity networks. And of course, if you can introduce more efficient batteries, why should you invest that much in natural gas? But we see it here in Norway as well. We're getting more, we're getting more competition in the natural gas market in Europe. First of all, the consumption is going down. Then you have much more cheap LNG coming out from the US, Qatar, Australia, not in Europe, it's in the rest of the world. And, so the natural gas market is,
it's also
developing.
It's also changing in a sense. Yeah, absolutely. I'm just wondering as well, Thina, do you have a view on, I mean, you mentioned offshore wind. Do you have a view on floating wind? I mean, do you think that has a future? And if so, where?
We absolutely hope so in Norway. No, I think it does have a big opportunity because we've seen many places, not only in this country, that it's a lot of opposition to have onshore wind production. Of course, because working with sustainability, one thing is that if you only look at the climate effect, it's nice to have wind power also on land. But these windmills do take up some land that could be used for other things, agriculture, for food production, or it could actually be a threat to ecological environment. So moving it out onshore would help. Of course, when you can have a floating wind power, or you could move it quite far from shore, and you can actually move it as far out as the oil rigs are or producing today. And of course, then you can't. So some people have complained about they don't like windmills. So of course you wouldn't see them, and they could be massive. They are massive, testing out these new windmills. Much more power, of course, as well. Then you need, of course, you need to get the electricity to land if that's where you're going to use it. But more power with huge wind parks. Of course, you get new questions there because then you will compete with fisheries or fishermen, and of course how it affects the oceans. But still, Japan is one place where they would look into floating wind because they have quite deep seas outside the coast, and they want to have green power, and they don't want to import. They import a lot of their energy. So I think floating wind could be very interesting for Japan.
And it's certainly safer than floating nuclear plants. But anyway, but I mean, do you think the driver behind that will be the so-called the old oil and gas majors, or do you think they could, how far away from creating offshore, floating offshore wind without subsidies? Are we 5-10 years away from that? Or?
Yeah, we're still 5-10 years away, I will say. You need still to develop the technology even further, and then of course you haven't tried to make it. You have to scale it up to get the cost down, and we're not even close to that yet. So that is why we hoped we could make a home market for that in Norway. To be, we probably don't need that much electricity as such, since we have a lot of hydro. But we could export more green energy, and we could also attract more energy-intensive industries to come to settle in Norway. So in that kind of sense, we hope that the government will actually focus more on this kind of production. It's interesting, they have actually supported that now as well, to have a test to produce floating wind, to use the electricity for having or access to more clean energy to the oil rigs. But of course that could be used other areas as well.
Well, I'm afraid that's about all we have time for this week. So thank you very much, Thina and Nora. And listeners, make sure you tune in next week. Also, remember to keep up to date with all our stories on Montel News, and follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn. And you can subscribe to the Montel Weekly Podcast on iTunes and Spotify.